Morning. That's me. Good. All right. Good morning. My name is Andrew Collins. All right, that's weird hearing my own voice. I am the principal planner at the Des Moines area PO. I'm also with the Mid-Iowa Planning Alliance for Community Development. I'm here today to talk about funding for the downtown of Indianola. So I'm going to do an overview of not only the funding itself, but just the grant program in general. We have some other folks here that will be available to answer questions and kind of go more in depth on some things that I don't have a ton of knowledge on necessarily, where they're the subject matter experts. So I also have Caleb Knudsen here with me today. Everyone say hi, Caleb. He's going to be, there we go. He's going to be the one who's going to be working on the application once it gets kind of solidified and moving forward. So just a quick update. CDBG stands for Community Development Block Grant Funding. I'm going to use that. We're going to use a lot of acronyms. I'm going to try to explain what they are, but CDBG facade funding, that's what we're here to talk about. That's funding made available by the state of Iowa. They provide a couple of $1 million every year to communities under 50,000 who qualify for this program, which I'll get to in here in a second, a little more in detail. But that funding is made available to fix up facades of commercial districts in whatever community that gets awarded. Typically, as part of that process, a community has to have a administrator on staff. That's who we are. There's more partners than just that, than just us. In the room today, we have Curtis Architecture and Design. You guys want to say hi and introduce yourselves real quick?
Rodney Curtis Architecture. So I'm the owner, and Jacob Gokul, he'll be the mostly boots on the ground. So we'll see quite a bit of Jacob, and you'll see some of me as well. So when you get to technical questions relative to your building, we should have an answer relative to
right.
So that's what he was talking about. Building specific versus grant specific.
I've been really quick. And I probably should have got up quickly and kind of introduced this before Andrew got started, but I know everybody's kind of familiar with the grant program we used last year, where we had $125,000 city dollars that we put into a few projects. This one's completely different. We're actually getting some federal funds on this. City does need to put some money in there, but I just want to be upfront with this, that this program, the way it's working this year, if we do go forward with it, is going to be a little bit different. The other thing I want to be very clear on right now is we don't have this grant funding in place yet. This is kind of step one to introduce the project to the public, to the downtown, see if we have enough people who are interested in doing this before we actually go forward with the federal application. So I want to make sure we're clear on those two things before we get started.
Yep. And it is a joint effort. I mean, there's a lot of people involved. You have the City of Indianola, who actually has to be the applicant. You've Curtis Architecture and Design, you have MIPA, and most importantly, the building owners. I mean, you guys are the ones whose facades are going to potentially be improved. So it's really a joint effort between all of us to make a successful project. So I'm going to go over the program itself, like Charlie mentioned, the opportunity that exists to apply for the funding, what kind of rules and requirements there are. Charlie mentioned this is different than the funding that you all that was made available to the city not too long ago, because this is federal funding. So anytime you have federal funding, you have increased rules and regulations. So you just have to be more cognizant when going about your project, but it is an amazing opportunity to be able to improve the community with an outside source of funding. So I'm going to jump into slides from IEDA themselves. So about a month or so ago, there was a application workshop specific to this downtown revitalization program that we're talking about. So if you get mad or have questions, don't like what you see on there, don't blame us. I'm just telling you what the state and what the feds require as far as this grant program goes. Feel free to ask as many questions as you want. A lot of this will be new to a lot of people in this room. So we'll do our best to clarify and provide information. And if we need to follow up with the state on anything, we can. But this does a really good job of summarizing what the requirements are, what the program is, and just the really awesome benefits that can result out of this. So feel free to jump in with questions or anything like that. So the program overview. So on an annual basis, provides about $3.7 million, $3.5 million in funding. On average in the state, about 5 to 6 projects are funded per year. So those are cities that get funded. So 75 cities have actually been, I shouldn't say cities, projects have been funded since 2009 because a city can apply multiple times. So plus 18 through the CDBG CV funding, but that's just a separate pot of money doing the same thing. So in this specific projects, in this grant program's case, HUD, which is the agency where the funding comes from, has some objectives for different programming. And the key thing here is the national objective of eliminating slum and blight. So slum and blight is something that is a broad term for many different things. Don't think of slum and blight as buildings are about to fall down. That's not what we're talking about here. In this case, and in many cases, it's a light version of that, where things are just in need of repair. They're not in danger of falling down or anything. They just need to be repaired in that case. So ideally, from the state's perspective, results are highly visible. So the state really wants to target areas and businesses that are very visible to the public, right? They're trying to make an impact in your community. So that's the kind of projects that they look for when they're funding these sorts of things. And just note too, this is very key, buildings with first floor residential, which I don't think applies here, but it might apply some other places, are now eligible for this project or program. So here's some photos just to give you an idea. When I talk about slum and blight, right? The pictures on the bottom, they weren't in danger of falling down. There were just some things that needed to be repaired on them. So this is like slum and blight light in a way, if you will. You can see that, there was impactful changes made, bringing a lot of the times it's bringing that building back to that historical character, and especially when you're talking about older buildings. So you can just kind of see that we're not talking about buildings about to fall down. These are good buildings, good sound buildings. They've just seen a lot of improvement. So the application from the city side, so the city is the one who actually has to receive the money. That's a rule that communities are the only ones allowed to apply for this funding. So when we say this is truly a collaborative project, we truly do mean that, because the city will be the one coordinating all this with the building owners, who ultimately are the ones receiving the money through the project. So for this case, there's a minimum of 8 buildings. If you want to receive the full funding of $650,000, you can do a minimum of 6 buildings. If you want less than that, again, that's really going to depend on who all wants to participate in the program, just where that area is. I mean, a lot of that just depends, but that's generally cities look to get about $650,000 to address slum and blight in their community. So, and I don't believe there's any iconic buildings in Indianola that would qualify for this. You're talking about, for in that case, like a building that's on that specific building would have to be on the National Historical Register to be eligible. So unless you have that, you're not going to qualify for a specific building. And generally, and this is one of those things that we want to be upfront to as well, and that you may be aware of, that if you're part of this program, let's say you want to, apply for funding, you want to fix up the facade, you want to do all that. There's no additional construction allowed on the project from when the city submits the application to when the project's done. And I don't mean, let's say you're a building owner and you want to participate, and you're one of the first buildings that gets done, right? So say a year. It takes a year to get done. We don't mean that. We mean the actual closeout of the entire project. So you're talking a couple of years where you're generally not allowed to have construction done anywhere in the building. That's for a couple of reasons. Mainly because, and this is from the state, this is what they explained in their presentation, is that we have something, there are different federal regulations that relates to construction, the payment of contractors. Davis-Bacon is a big legislation that applies. And so they don't want to have non-Davis-Bacon construction happening while federal construction is happening at the same time. It just gets too messy, and they just don't allow that. So that's why they don't do that. So generally a project, if you want to do the outside and the inside at the same time, you can't. It's really, you kind of have to pick at that time. Yes.
If you have an emergency, let's say the roof has something you have to do to the roof, You can get an emergency.
Correct. An emergency thing, a pipe's leaking, roof's leaking, that absolutely can be done. We're talking more cosmetic. If you want to update your bathroom, do new flooring, in your whatever that cosmetic thing is, that's what we're talking about not being allowed. But if you're having an emergency, please go ahead and fix it.
It happens, right?
It does happen, yes.
Almost on every project, there seems to be something go where a roof, typically a roof that needs to be worked on.
I guess to piggyback on that real quick, if you have work ongoing now or that you started months or even a year ago, as long as you have documentation to prove that you have those contracts, you've been working in your building, you can generally continue that. We just need to get approval from IEPA.
And that would be included in the application as well. That would be something that would be done up front. So. I already mentioned the first floor not being allowed. So only fronts. So if as a building owner, only fronts and sides that are readily available. And their definition is a little unique, but basically if you're driving down the street, whatever facade is fronting that street, if you could turn and look at it, that qualifies. If you have to, so for like a back of a business, I know we got the one ways are not here anymore, but if there was, let's say you were driving down a street and you had to turn back and look, that doesn't qualify. So generally backs of buildings don't in that case. I know that they can and they do, get included sometimes, but that's how the state qualifies facades. And so you has to be readily available from the street that it fronts. And this is really related to the roof. And Rod would be better able to answer this than I would, but it's not just facades. All the exterior is eligible for this. So roofs are a part of that. They can't be the whole thing, right? That's not the goal of this program, but it's absolutely an element that can be included. So Rod, I don't know if you had anything more on roofs, because I know those get a little touchy sometimes with the
They
state.
do, and we'll help you through. If you want a roof replaced, we'll help you through that. It is a calculation of 40% rule, which is
Doesn't apply anymore. It's no longer effective.
no longer in effect.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I was
So
saying.
we can replace a roof altogether.
Mhm.
All right, that's good news. So we can tie that in. The challenge is going to be fitting a roof, which is
Yes.
roof and tuck pointing are the two most expensive things, and the thing that is best used on this grant because it's hard to bite those two things off on your own. So the roof, as long as we have enough in the budget to accommodate 6 or 8 facades. Right? Does that make sense? Because we got a number of facades turned into one project, one budget. So that's part of Jacob and I's challenge to try to get that whole package put together, with each building specific to meet that one budget. Now, from a facade standpoint, if you have a facade, to keep it simple, if you got a 40-foot wide building and it used to have 2 addresses back in the day, then oftentimes we count that one facade as 2 because it has 2 addresses or 2 front doors. So we can break one building down depending on what it is architecturally and how it's functioned into multiple facades. So it's possible to turn 3 buildings into 6, maybe even 8 facades, right? To fulfill a full project. Does that make sense? So if you have a larger building, sometimes that will work. And we have a couple of those.
Yeah, it especially helps too if the building is partitioned on the inside for separate businesses. And I noticed at least a couple of the ones that have shown interest are.
Yeah, and that's important. And we'll get to that a little later. Just when applying to the state, they look at like the average cost per facade as part of the calculation they look at, as well as so when you're talking facade, that's why we have to break it down like that. Because if you only get certain dollar amount per facade, right? If you're talking roof and tuck pointing, that gets very expensive. And so, you have to generally try to make it work within the bounds. And if you're able to do count multiple facades within one building, that does help tremendously on the application. I mentioned the iconic building. I don't think that applies here, so I'm not really going to get into it too much. But this is that application. Again, very unlikely that any one, when they say non-entitlement, they just mean any city under 50,000 would have more than 1 or 2. But again, if that applies, we can absolutely
We don't have any historic buildings in the square. I think what we have is on Simpson and the
Mhm.
admin building. and the
Exactly.
Metro Upper building.
Yep.
So,
And so with this, oh, go ahead.
Is iconic the same as significant, historically significant? Andrew, do you know?
No. We have to ask the state on that.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was a study done on the downtown Indianola, a couple of years ago that got submitted to the state, the SHPO, the State Historical Preservation Office, that did look at historically significant buildings, and that's what Rod's referencing. So there are some, but I don't think that technically automatically qualifies you for this. So target area. So when the city, all the partners get together to apply, for funding. The way that this funding is structured is they really want to target an area. So when the application is structured, you have to identify a target area. So that has to be either in a designated, and this is for the city more so, urban revitalization area, or via a resolution of governing body. So the city council would just have to pass a resolution identifying the target area. Doesn't have to be contiguous, but should still be basically a rectangular shape. So this is one of those things that depends on what building owners are interested, right? That defines our target area, and then we have to massage that from there on what we actually submit to the state. Because the state, the tighter that target area is, the more fundable, the more competitive it will be in the overall state application pool. So remember I mentioned that slum and blight. So again, depending on what you have for that target area, you have to have a minimum of 25% to be slum and blight. And there's been a lot of improvements done on the square already and the surrounding area. So we really have to make sure that we're whatever, when this is Rod's case, he's gonna be working on that side of things. Whatever we decide is, or Rod decides, is determined as the 25%. That generally that is something that gets decided once we figure out who's interested and how. It's all a fluid process in that regard.
Doesn't directly affect you. It's
Correct. It's more about.
It's not gonna directly impact.
No, but you may be like, why am I not included in this? This is probably one of the reasons why, is we have to just fit within the state constraints. You may have, there may be a building that makes a ton of sense in the world, but if it's off by itself in the middle of nowhere, it doesn't fit what the state's looking to fund. So it does nothing to do with the actual project itself or the building. It's all about how we structure it within the application. So again, this is not really for you guys, but that middle one, providing realistic expectations. That's more for you guys. The rest of it is something we're dealing with and the city's already done, so we're all good there. But when we're talking timing, budget, construction, we already talked about the construction limitations. There has to be a commitment letter before we can even apply. So when the city looks to apply, the building owner has to commit. Doesn't mean that they can't, I believe, pull out later, but they just have to commit to the project. So construction, it's not going to be fast. Remember, these are federal dollars. So just to give you an idea of timeline here, apply in November. That's this is when this application's due. We won't find out until January, February if awarded. And then from there, Caleb and I will have to work on the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. So we actually have to do environmental work ahead of time on the area, on the buildings. So realistically, going out to bid won't be till summer of next year. So from November to summer, there's a lot happening behind the scenes, but we're not actually even into construction yet. And then realistically from there, you're talking 1 to 2 years of construction, depending on contractors, weather, buildings, what you find in buildings once you start doing stuff, all that fun stuff. I would
play the contractor. It's an open bid. So
Yeah. You have to go to an open bid, you take the lowest bid, you have to do all that process.
Usually a good year. It depends on where we start, right? December, January is cold. You don't want to do any tuck pointing because it costs more to cover and heat the tuck pointing part of it. So there is some lull during the winter months if we're working outside for something. So it stretches that, but a year is what we try to shoot for from start of construction to end of construction.
So if that's the case, you're talking 1.5 to 2 years total project time and possibly longer. And with budgets too, anytime you do construction, you're digging into older buildings, facades, you do generally find things, right, that pop up, you just not aware of that was behind that window or what's, on that window or what insulation was used 50 years ago. So that all has to be taken into account. So this is not you get the money up front and you go to a project. This is very much a calculated way of implementing this funding. So
With the bid, who posts that bid? Is it the city?
those guys.
Well, in combination, so we gotta go
Yeah,
through, IEDA's requirements, which still has
Plan
some.
rooms, some other stuff, yeah, but it's,
We will feed you that information and then we'll get it in a newspaper, get it on your website or some of those sort of things.
So the property owner doesn't have to.
nothing you guys have to do, as far as that goes. That's all being taken care of on the administration, the architecture, construction management side of things.
For these little hiccups that might come up, like hypothetically, you tear open the front of my building and then surprise, there's asbestos.
Mhm.
I guess who's picking up that tab? Like, is it going into the percentage again of like, hey, this is federally grant, then this is city, and then this is you? Like where does that lie to?
It's an awesome question. It's a
Yes.
good question. Very good
Great question, yes.
We put a contingency fund built into the overall cost of your building, your facade.
Sure.
Multiple facades. So we have a built-in pocket of money that you would have already paid your percentage to that little line item. It's a line
Sure.
item
Okay.
of dollars. So it would go towards that as a change order to
Right.
where it's already built in, your percentage, city percentage, grant percentage would automatically feed into that change, whether it's asbestos or whatever it is. So then we try to if we use all that up on you towards the end of the project, but we don't use all yours, we can pull yours, what's left towards the end of the project, we can
It's like
pull
an
it out,
insurance pool.
give you your percentage back, slide it to your building, charge you the owner's percentage to make up for what we paid him back, right?
Sure.
And use that contingency on your facade. So
Okay.
that's how we kind of piggyback that contingency, but we do honor the contingency of a certain percentage. Usually it's 5% unless we have a building that's got a big slip cover on it, we might put an 8% contingency because there's more unknowns to your building. Does that make sense?
And ultimately too, eventually, if there is a big enough, like say there's a big enough issue, right? That would be run out of money, state money, the city money, your money, it would be then you. So, but generally that doesn't happen. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it can happen. Anytime you tear into something, you don't know, right?
We had one building downtown Atumwa that, we started pulling the transom, which would be above the window, the main floor windows. And the above brick actually dropped on the contractor 1.5 to 2 inches, and there was a big panic. We ended up taking the whole facade down. There was some additional grant money that we begged for to try to help rebuild that. And we had a pretty good contingency built into that one, right? So that's that little larger contingency on something that's a bit more suspect. We've had, right? So there's sometimes that will occur. We've done this enough that we have some sense of whether we get it wrong. And there's times where you'll have we'll see a structural issue on your brick. Sometimes we need a structural engineer. Sometimes the mason's just fine to fix that by reteching. So we'll help make that decision on the front end with you so that try to have that covered in a logical way. Doesn't mean it won't expand on us as well. So there's a little risk relative to that, but we try to help you cover.
I just looked here really quick too, but just to give you a frame of reference on that. So in the downtown project with the infrastructure and all that the city's been doing, we're currently sitting in now year 3 of that project at about a 3% contingency that we've used up. So
5%.
5% is probably going to cover it. If there's something that's heavy, 8% is definitely going to cover it. But I mean, we've had some big things come up in the downtown that we've had to pay for. And again, we've only used 3% so far. So
Yeah, we're doing or have done 15 of these. COVID side and full DTR side. So we've gone through this number of times. Got it as best it can, but once in a while there's a surprise.
So just kind of moving this a little quickly, this is more the back end side of things that you have to meet that downtown core, you have the target area has to have some blight or be in very poor condition, and there's some other stuff. So I'll skip this because it doesn't really apply to you guys. But just give you an idea what's happening behind the scenes. When we, you know, as a city, as MIPA, as there's architecture, these are the things we have to consider when packaging that application to IEDA. There's a lot more that goes into this. We want to fix up buildings. It's meeting a target. So for you guys, what is blight? And what it isn't. So when you're talking about your building, when you're considering what applies and what doesn't, right? I have approaching end of useful life. That's not blight. Is energy inefficient? Well, if it's a good repair, that's not blight either. It's just energy inefficient. So, you know, if it's old, ugly, you know, anticipating future blight, that's not blight. Like this is some things that I think when applications, this is probably, I think, a little exacerbating for the lady that was Sarah Plowman who was giving the presentation, is she's seen all those things in an application and she's like, that is not what this is. Here's what it is: decay, dilapidation, broken windows, missing windows, damage, you know, tuck pointing, that is a structural issue, roofs, all that stuff. That's what we're talking about. So don't want to make it sound like we're gonna go in and modernize building. No, it's fixing buildings, right? It is modernizing, but that needs it.
We can go quite a ways though.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, this is for the application side. So sometimes it's clear, right? That's slum and blight. You can see broken windows, you can see missing brick. I mean, that's pretty cut and dry as far as does this apply or not. But you can also have lighter blight. The bottom building looks structurally sound. Got some missing windows though. Got some things. Was this one of yours, Rod?
Yeah, this is one of the.
Exactly. So it qualified, and you may not consider, like some may say that's not blight, but it is, because there's structural components that are missing or need repaired.
And this is one building where it may not look like it's in bad shape, but this whole building needed tuck pointing. And that was the vast majority of the project.
We got new windows in it as well.
New windows, yeah.
But yeah, that's so, again, it looks a little different in different circumstances. So this is this documentation side. Again, this is something that those guys going over their room or First Architecture will be working on. They're the experts on this, but generally there has to be an analysis done on the building as part of the application, just to provide the building elements, you know, descriptions that will include in the application, just pictures of things you guys know what to take pictures of, and then just kind of ranking what buildings, you know, need to be done and which ones don't. Generally, the ones that are ranked the highest include in the application. So. And again, this is more for our use, but if you're seeing us taking pictures or them taking pictures, there's a reason why we have to show it in the application. You have to kind of show the full building, you have to show different elements of the building. They keep harping on this first floor residential use. Apparently that happens in other parts of the state. That does not happen here. But you often can't get to have all the bad elements or all the bad buildings. And that's the point that she's trying to make here, when that's something that we were talking about earlier. You can't have every building in this. You can't have all parts of the square on this. It really has to be a targeted effort. And like I mentioned, cities apply multiple times. You don't just get this one grant. You can apply multiple times. So if you're not in on the first round, there's potentially, I'm not gonna speak for the city, potentially an opportunity to apply again in the future.
Andrew, one round a year of this?
Yeah, except that's not quite how it works. You don't get money if you have an open grant. I think they used to do that back in the day. I know when the earlier applications, the city might have 2 rounds awarded, but they want speed and completion of the project because just like everybody, IEDA answers to HUD. And if HUD goes, hey, why do you have $600,000 that hasn't been spent in 5 years? They're gonna have to answer to that. So they want projects that are ready to go. They don't want to award out to communities, even if they know they're gonna apply again in the future. You just gotta finish the project, go to the next one.
This last go round, Glenwood applied for this time frame, same time frame we're at now last year. They had enough money for 4, were they awarded 4? They had enough money for 6. They turned 2 projects down because the application wasn't to their liking. And they reopened it 2 or 3 months later. Glenwood fixed their application with some of our help, and they got it. So it doesn't mean that that won't happen.
Right.
It doesn't happen a lot, but it doesn't mean that wouldn't happen if we get turned down.
And again, turn down even this year, next year can be, like, you can apply every year. So you have an opportunity to fix applications. It depends, maybe not as many people apply next year. It just really depends on the round. This one, just to give an idea of the pictures that need to be included in the application. This is an example of bad pictures. This is more for us, but just to give you an idea, like the state doesn't like, these are the things they don't like to see. They want to see better pictures. So generally good pictures for documenting, good, fair, poor. You can see those are poor condition. And why? You really, those are great examples of like a foundational issues. Those are the things they want to see. That really adds to that application. They want to see that zoomed in distress on the building.
Those are the pictures we normally take because we want to get those things out.
Exactly, yeah,
You take those pictures, we don't.
correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And we'll try to schedule with you a good time where we can get inside as well. So if we see a structural issue on the outside, sometimes we'll look on the inside and see if cracks are showing up in the same spot, or we'll take better pictures of the inside of your windows and such.
They like to see full opening windows, right? So if you reduce the size of your window upstairs, boards above it or something like that, they want us to try to put that whole opening back into the building. Sometimes the ceiling on the inside gets in the way, so we have to also do some work on the ceiling on the inside of that window, which makes a huge difference. So.
I think one thing worth pointing out, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is from the property owner, business owner standpoint, there's really not much you do need to do through this process other than make a financial commitment to it. I think for the most part, you guys are doing the heavy lifting of the work. Obviously, design plans, you're communicating with the property owners and getting their feedback on all of that stuff and making sure it's what they want. But the heavy lifting of the grant application, hiring the contractor and everything is really on our half.
We need good feedback,
Yeah.
quick, good feedback from you in order to.
What is the big mistake that's made with the application side?
Just the verbiage of it. So this other cog for Glenwood, it's not Andrew. The cog went,
Not us.
the cog went through some exiting of their expertise in their office. And so they had a very green person come in trying to do the application. That wasn't the way the state liked it. Also, so you know, you will hear us talk about the state is going through a transition as well. Andrew
Yes.
may also talk about that a little bit, where they're transferring from Ed to Sarah. Sarah's very much more by the book than what
Yes.
Ed was. And so we're used to a little looser grip on the system than what Sarah does. So we're in that, so you have to bear with us a little bit in that transition that we're going through as well, trying to get that.
We deal with a lot of grant programs. I'm shouldn't say it, but we're glad that we don't have such a stickler on every grant program that we do. And actually you are seeing, so a lot of the people at IEDA have retired, Ed retired. You have new people in the NEPA position as well, which is what we really deal with your assistance, obviously, but what we deal with. So they're also more of a stickler. So it's just getting a little harder on our side, but the nuts and bolts of it are still the same. There's just less leeway when it comes to certain things. But again, that won't affect you guys. It's more of an administrative thing that we have to deal with.
When was the last time we had one?
This one, I don't think we've ever done this
No.
particular program.
Yeah, no.
We've never done this particular.
Central Iowa has not had historically gone after these sorts of funds.
I know,
But
Knoxville has, Pella
Just this
has.
last round, Pella did a while ago. Yeah,
Osceola has done 3.
Tuscaloosa, yeah, that's the other one.
yeah. So they're in there, yeah, they've done 3 already.
Tom was done 2.
Someone needs more. Someone needs. a
Tama
lot.
does need lots more. Agreed. But Oscalosa's almost done their whole downtown
That's
spread. They got a few buildings
Incredible, yeah.
left.
I agree. Yeah, it's awesome.
Winterset just did a round not too long ago. Greenfield's doing right now.
Yeah.
Trying to think of some other ones.
Independence is another community, if you're familiar with Independence, along the river. They've got They don't have a square, they've got more of a lineal. They're gonna have, they were fortunate that the COVID grant, which was talked about briefly, is a little different grant, but the same process than the DTR that we're doing. We were prepared at the time, and the timing was great to where we could push both projects at the same time. Independence has, we're almost done with Independence. It's gone through a huge transition.
Sheraton has done it as well. Like, it just, there's a lot of communities who have. And you can kind of, and the communities we mentioned, you probably, wow, their downtowns are pretty nice, and it's a result of this program.
Will you come to our individual building and say, hey,
Yeah.
you're not gonna qualify, or
Yeah.
you're not.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's the whole process.
Money or whatever.
Yeah, in fact, we're here all day. So if we want to come visit your buildings today, if we can, then we'll have a very good idea. We can specifically talk about them today with you if you have time.
Today. No naps.
No need to delay.
So just in general, to give you guys an idea, when we're writing the grant, trying to get the money, you know, this is good written examples. So we're gonna use things like discoloration, deterioration, missing, crumbling, chipped, sagging, you know, all those moistures getting in. If you have, you know, windows that are leaking, there's stuff rotting, all that stuff. That's what we're gonna look for. So as building owners, my point to that is, if you have those issues, please let us know so we can include in the application. It'll be probably evident when you guys take a look, but if there's like a thing, oh yeah, this, you know, when it rains, there's water that runs down here, and if it's not evident, it's like,
We
okay,
don't always know that, right?
Yeah.
If you got water leaking someplace, we may not see that.
right, especially on a brick or something like that. So please let us know that, so we can, one, they can also know to include that, but then we can include that in the application side.
Another good example, which ended up making its way into Glenwood's application, is that an owner told me a story of how one of their upper level windows got blown from a draft and through the back of their building and blew the window out front end of their building. And they fixed that one window, but all the 3 other windows on the front of the building are in the same condition, same age. We were able to make the argument that if this happened to one, no doubt it could happen again to the others. And that's something we never would have known without the owner's help.
Adds to the application.
That's a lot.
So we mentioned an average per facade building cost. They're not quite sure, but around, you know, what has been in the past? It hasn't been 75, it's been.
We're at 100. I mean, if you have tuck pointing on your building, it'll find 100.
Per facade?
If you're at 20 foot, sometimes it won't get to 100, but
Okay.
yeah, I mean, we're gonna attack it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're gonna take as much advantage of this thing relative to what you guys would want to do, right? What you'll dictate it. But it's not unheard of that if there's a tuck point that we can spend 100K total.
So some other things to keep in mind, because this is federal money, historic preservation standards also apply. So remember how I said, bringing it back to that architectural historical character adds to cost. You can't just slap up anything. It has to be within the historic context of the building. And just in general, every year, there's always a new thing we have to do, which is why costs keep increasing. Now, for example, radon mitigation, that's a thing. We have to go in, somebody has to go and test for that. It can't be like Caleb and I walking in with a test. We actually have to get a company to come out, do the test themselves, and then test. And then if there's radon, you have to mitigate it. So again, there's all these things you have to test for.
Lead-based paint.
Lead-based paint,
And the asbestos question
asbestos, yeah.
was good. Asbestos, if we can see it, we will test it, right?
Mhm.
The question was if we don't see it, right, what happens? But if we can see it, we will test it.
So
And
all
know
of that
it.
applies and it will have to be tested. So setting expectations earlier on. Don't want to say hidden costs, but we already talked about having contingencies and the unexpected. So that's not anything new. You don't get to work on your own building. That's the other thing through this project. You cannot, let's say, I mean, generally, you're not supposed to do additional work, right? But you, like, let's say, you're like, I want to save costs. I don't want, you know, for my building, it's gonna be over budget. So I'll go in and remove something. I'll take the asbestos out myself. No. Not just because that's unsafe, but it violates the law. Or let's say you want to take brick off yourself or do your own tuck point. breaking the law. Well, it is, because as part of this whole process, everything becomes what we call federalized. And so we have to meet, you can't do work on it. Like, that's just the point. Because if you do work on it, then you have to pay yourself, you have to meet certain standards. There's federal labor laws that apply. There's so many things. And you also weren't procured properly, even though you're the building owner. That doesn't matter. You have to be procured to do work on this project. So there's a lot of things that go into it. So just know you can't save costs by doing your own work. And especially if we find out about that, you get disqualified and you gotta pay the money back. So there's a lot of things that go into that. So just know that you will not have that opportunity. We talked about contingency already. So I don't think this will apply because we're not doing residential spaces. We're only doing the exteriors, right? Okay, so I'll skip all this, but if we were to do it, it'd be a pain in the butt. And it wouldn't be really worth it because you're hard capped. CDBG hasn't increased, and this is just more, I'm pontificating, has not increased housing costs since like the 80s. So for federal dollars, you can only use $224,999 to improve housing, which is in these day and age, a nominal amount of money if you have to do anything substantial. So we just tend not to do it because you can't do what you need to do with the dollars. You can on the facade though. There's Preserve America. I talked about that historical preservation type stuff. This is all stuff we have to worry about. We deal with the state. Robert Janae, he's the new guy, one of the newer people over there. You guys. So you have to do a pledge letter. There's gonna be a total cost estimate. You have to acknowledge that. Acknowledgement of future contribution, financial contribution. We'll get to that in a second. Acknowledgement of federal requirements like historic review, prevailing wage. I talked about Davis-Bacon, that's prevailing wage. No other construction work. All of that has to be agreed upon ahead of time. It's not legally binding, like I said, but if we're going down the road, right, you have to be pretty committed to it. And that's a good point because it's a lot of work that goes into prepping an application, doing the roof of your building, doing design work. All that needs to be for a building owner that's committed to that process. So this is what we're supposed to not do. So don't promise until we know how much money we have and they've done their assessment. That's a very key thing. We don't want to promise, oh yeah, of course, you'll be in the application, and come to find out because of how the application works, we can't do it. So we're not doing that. We have not. So just know that there's a reason why we're not just, even if you have the perfect building, we can't say yes right away. Talk about expectations. Yeah, again, don't expect construction until next summer. Just something that we went over. And all the federal requirements that go into this. So routine maintenance work items and emergency repairs are exempted. So again, that maintenance piece on the working on your building, but anything beyond that you can't do. So when they do their evaluation, there's a scoring matrix on this. So we have to have a pretty good score. We have to score above 28 points to qualify. So just the things for your awareness, leveraging of funds. So we talked about 650,000 as the CDBG funding part of this. I think the city's targeting a match of another 650,000 or around there, correct? And that's because you have to do that to be competitive. You have to at least do 36 to 45% just to even be competitive for the application. And the more you put in, the more competitive you are.
And I think our hope would be, the 50% comes from CDBG and then 25% from the city, 25% from property.
Right. So when we say local match, we don't mean your money, just any non-federal money.
When that percentage, when I threw out 100,000, it's an easy math, right? It's 25,000 for the share. It's 75,000 put in the grant.
So we have to talk about all the buildings are included. Obviously, that's the write-up we talked about. To the degree to which, the scope is appropriate, all of that stuff. So that's the one thing I wanted to mention though, was the local match part. That is a big piece that they will generally say in all CDBG funds, unless you're putting in at least half the money, don't expect to be funded. That includes water sewer projects, that includes community facility project, any other project. That's just a general rule with the state's funding because it is very competitive. I mean, it's even if with all the hoops you have to jump through, it's a good pot of money that happens every year. This one's more for us. I'll skip this, but yeah, we have to have those owner pledge letters in there as well as part of our application, the stuff that would apply to you guys the most. This is where they have unanswered questions. So go ahead, guys, ask, pepper away. Thank you for letting us speak to you today. Happy to answer any other questions you guys may have. And obviously in the future too, if you have more questions, you can contact either of us.
Architecturally on the pre-application, so we do a pre-application, right? So we are in that stage right now, where November 22nd is when we send in the application to see if we get awarded for the full project. So in pre-application, our architectural work will photograph your building, isolate or itemize your slum and blight list on your particular building. We will say, did I say photograph or measure first?
You said photographs, so we'll measure.
We'll put it into the computer, a 3D model. We will design it so that you know exactly what it looks like in the 3D model with colors, right? Doesn't mean you can change colors, but you'll see what it will look like. Very much so. And we will do a cost projection. So we'll have some idea of to what we think based off of past projects, your number will come in. So again, the 75,000 that IEDA throws out, we don't want to get bamboozled too much. We want to make sure we cover your expenses on your facade if we can. So our projection hasn't necessarily been over the top, but we've been pretty good with it. But right, we don't want you guys coming up, because what happens is when you have a 25%, 75% split, all of a sudden when we have to take $10,000 out of your facade for budget reasons, you're only taking out $2,500 for you, and you're saying, wow, look at what we have to pull out for $2,500, right? We try to avoid that. Doesn't mean we do every time, but we do a pretty good job trying to avoid it. Try to avoid that. In part why our number is a little higher than what I suggest.
And from MIPA's side, we're a little more out of it, just because those guys are dealing with you day to day. That we're not architects, we're not building experts, we're the grant side of that. And that's typically where we'll deal more with the city and the state on a lot of the background stuff. But doesn't mean you can't ask us questions or we won't be involved. It's just you'll see those guys more than you'll see us. But we're all working together behind the scenes to make this work. We're just the grant people.
That $75,000 average, I don't think really has accounted for the increase in costs we've seen since the beginning of COVID as well. And some of the time delays, generally for our projects now, we're not seeing issues with delays nearly as much. But it's not to say that in a year, maybe metal will be harder to get for coping for your roof or for door hardware or something like that, which may affect the timeline of construction as well. It's not always necessarily the contractor, it could be the supply of materials.
And some of the federal regulations are to blame for that as well. There's Buy American that, takes into account, and usually don't do a ton of steel, but a lot of this is something we're dealing with the transportation side. They're starting to require more components that aren't copper and steel. It's, some of the electronics, some of the, which again, just other materials have to have a certain percentage that are made in America. A lot more complicated than the steel, because steel, you can stamp that, right? Some of this other stuff, it's a little more complicated, but it's just making things more difficult on the material side as well.
We've never had a problem with that.
Yeah.
Do we have 5 building owners back there? Am I counting right?
City, so.
So 4? Are you a building owner back there? Yep. Yeah, and when we're done as a group and you guys have time, either schedule a time with us if we can today. If we can't, that's fine. We'll virtual, whatever it takes. We would like to get to your buildings and measure it up at least, whether you're in or out. We want to take advantage of being able to analyze it so we can properly suggest things for you. Go. Yeah.
That's what we like to hear.
So
Yay.
timeline wise, the actual application from the city is due November 22nd.
Mhm.
When is the decision for who will be in the application?
Oh, before that. Oh, yes. It's gonna take, he's gonna have to measure, like we were talking about. It really depends on who's interested, who's gonna be committed, and what projects makes the most sense. And right now, we have an idea, but we don't know that.
So the two components, right, is we want to provide the best application we can. So Andrew was fairly cautious about just because you might be in doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be chosen for the application. The two things that we see is his target area. So if you're a lone building out here and we have to increase the target area, the state doesn't like that. If you're all nicely grouped together, that's a big improvement in one small area that they like. That's why they knock you a bit if you've got a building someplace far away. And if you don't need a lot of improvements, right, then maybe you're not as compared to another building that could be in the right. So if we're judging one building against another one and one has more slum and blight that's more of a improvement than the other one, that one might get slid in because of that. And I guess for the third one, budget is always a big one, right? Because Jacob and I's big challenge, what happens every year when we have more interest than we have dollars, we got to make everybody's building fit into that one budget to take advantage of leveraging the 50%, 25%, 25%, right? Otherwise, if we exceed that total budget number, dollars have to come from someplace. It usually comes from the building owners.
Yeah, 1.3 million might sound like a lot when you say it, when you're talking 8 buildings, multiple facades, it gets eaten up pretty quick.
Depends on how tall you are and how much tech pointing you need,
Yeah.
and now the roof, right? The roof is completely wide open now, so not so sure the 40% rule is better than not having it.
They did say in the app, I will say this, they didn't have it on the slide, but they're like, with this rule's going away, but it cannot be the main component. They kind of made that clear.
Yeah, for us, that might be an oxymoron because the roof may be that much expensive, right? The 40% rule kind of helps that control that situation where it's not. We'll cross that hurdle when we get to it, if we need to.
Go along with that. Just because you have a small renovation doesn't necessarily, you can't be in the project either. There's instances where $50,000 that we don't wanna waste and go back to the state. And maybe there's a small building that we can kind of squeeze in there. And we'll try to do that as well.
Good point.
You're not limited to 8 buildings. It's just a matter of that's the minimum that they're requiring to be eligible for 650. But if we had a lot of smaller projects, we could have more than 8.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. However, generally it's difficult to have a bunch of small projects like that. Would you say that?
Well, yeah, construction costs have gone up.
Right, that's
so
what we're
much.
getting at.
Back in the day,
Yeah.
we could do,
10, 12.
12,
14, yeah.
15.
Yeah.
And today, the budget can, and the reason why they just increased it from 500 to a 650,000 grant on the same number of facades is because of the construction cost that's out there. We'll help you through all that though. Ideally for us, we'd love to have 10 or 12 facades that we're working on that if we can slip 9 and 10 in there, it also makes the application better. Choose. It's not always good for those owners to get left out.
And it gives us good insight for whether or not there is a potential second phase and who might be in it.
I don't know anything else.
Anything else myself?
Yeah.
We're
This
commenced,
application
sounds like.
back here, I think I already filled this out.
You've
We do have
Yeah, there's,
some business cards up here if you want them.
oh, okay. If you've already filled that out, great, and you've got that turned in.
Yeah, is that one of ours up there that's got questions
Yeah, I have
relative?
the-
Please fill that out. If you have not filled out that paper, please fill that out for us. That gives us an idea, helps us track and right, it also helps us, if you have a budget, we're
Is that online?
gonna want to discuss your budget. If your budget was $5,000 out of your pocket, if it's $5,000 above
They're all-
or whatever, we want to know that because we're gonna try to design you around that.
Are there any stipulations on the property owner's financial commitment? Like, does it have to be in hand or can they get a loan for that?
That's a good question.
You can get a loan.
And we often encourage local banks to try to help help that cause, not that they will. We try to encourage local banks to. And from a financial, right, once we're awarded, and it depends on how the city and Andrew want to schedule the payments, it'll be incremental, whatever that incremental payment would be.
There's going to be some amount that will be needed before construction, but I'm not quite sure just yet on that. But yeah, it'll be incremental. Definitely needs to be fleshed out. Yeah, from the states and federal's perspective, local funding can come from literally anywhere. It just can't be federal dollars. We're at a bank loan, cash under mattress, whatever. All good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the goodies, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks to
absolutely.
you guys for coming.
Yeah, if you
Absolutely.
haven't, please grab a bagel.
Yeah.
Or
We have
3 or 4 or 5.
coffees Local here from Savor the Rise, so please.
And Emily, my sister.
Maybe there's.
Thanks, everybody. We'll get done now, but feel free to ask us questions or reach out later.